actually think humans are quite simple. At our core, we want, food, shelter, water, companionship. It's all just very, very easy to live a very happy life when you have those things. And when you go into a hospitality space, it's about, the bonuses on top of that, amazing food, amazing service, and the connection human to human. And I think it's just bringing it back to its core. And I think what hospitality has an opportunity to do right now is make the back end so easy and so efficient that you go back to people just helping people.
Welcome to Behind the Stays, a podcast that shares the stories behind your favorite boutique hotels, short-term rentals, and hospitality brands, and the hosts, operators, and entrepreneurs who've brought them to life. Every Tuesday and Friday, you'll meet the military veterans, the retired flight attendants, the tech entrepreneurs, the school teachers, the single moms, the hoteliers, and real estate investors, who are all, in their own unique ways, shaping the future of travel and hospitality. Discover how these visionaries from all over the world have built stunning landscape hotels in the mountains, designed bohemian bungalows on the beach, erected eclectic, off-grid, nature-immersed escapes, and so much more. Behind the Stays is brought to you by Journey, a first-of-its-kind loyalty program that brings together an alliance of the world's top independently owned and operated stays and allows travelers to earn points and perks on boutique hotels, vacation rentals, tree houses, ski chalets, glamping experiences, and so much more. And I'm your host, Zach Boozy-Cruz, head of the Journey Alliance. All right, friends, without further ado, enjoy the show. Cory Schisler isn't just building beautiful hotels and restaurants. He's rethinking what hospitality actually feels like. He's worked with brands like Proper and Viceroy, and he co-founded the Madrona in Healdsburg, and has a sharp eye for the subtle and not so subtle ways hospitality has evolved, and where it still needs to catch up. In this episode, we unpack the early experiences that shaped Cory's hospitality worldview. We talk about how to balance timeless service with modern guest expectations, the tech that actually enhances hospitality and the kind that kills it, why QR code menus might signal the beginning of the end. We also talk about what's next in hospitality, the rise of micro-resorts, and the white space between STRs and hotels. Cory also shares how he approaches concept development, the difference between good and great creative partners, and what it really takes to build a team culture where guests feel seen and where staff feel proud. This one's packed with insights for anyone thinking about the next generation of great hospitality brands, which is just about all of you, if not all of you, listening to today's conversation. All right, friends, without further ado, get ready to meet Cory. All right, Cory, we are live, my friend. How are you doing today, fine sir?
Life is good, no complaints.
Well, that's good. That's a great way to start a Monday as we're recording this. I have followed you for a bit, Cory, and we've connected on LinkedIn, and I've over the last couple of days in particular, I've just been poking around your website, learning a little bit more about who you are and what you do. And I wanted to have you on the show because you seem to have your hands in like so many different aspects of hospitality, which is like wildly exciting. Most of the people that come onto this show are, building their own hotels, or they've built a collection of really cool, unique short-term rentals. And, maybe now they're scaling a little bit. Very few, if any, know the restaurant world, which I know that you have your hands in now currently. And very few have, done something, I think, as impressive as you have with the Madrona in a very like short period of time. So I'm excited for today's conversation because I think we're going to get to touch on several different aspects of hospitality and really understand your thoughts, your vision, your takes, if you will, on sort of where the industry's going, why it might be going that way, and what we might, learn from the way that it's going. I wanted to start though by just hearing a little bit about your story. Like, why are you even doing this, Cory? Like, what inspired you as a kid, as a child, to even get into hospitality? Can you trace anything back to the early days of growing up and what you loved and how that might transfer to what you do now?
Yeah, it's funny because I just turned 40 and I've been questioning why I'm in hospitality quite a bit. But It's in my blood. Both my parents were in hospitality. When I was really young, my dad was general manager of this really amazing fine dining restaurant in Southern California. And so some of my earliest memories, period, are from running through the back of house of that restaurant, like hanging out with the chefs and just kind of running amok and having a blast. And then he went into the wine industry, and my mom was always in restaurants as well, mostly on the event catering side. And so it's just something that I was exposed to. And I think growing up, going out to restaurants was a big part of how we lived our lives. And, definitely taking advantage of my dad's expense account and having fun at really beautiful restaurants. While my mom still, cooked at home half the time. And so there was a lot of exposure, I think, early on to the beauty of food, beverage, and the restaurant world and how that can kind of create magical experiences. So it started off there, but I really started getting a travel bug in high school. And by the time I was looking for college opportunities, hospitality school was kind of the only option for me in my mind. I knew I wanted to be in this industry. I knew I had a passion for it and wanted to see where it went. I also kind of thought hospitality is not going anywhere. This was like a post 9/11 world,
Mm.
a couple years right after, and so just kind of thinking about what's going to be around for a long time that feels magical and connects humans to each other in really beautiful ways.
Well, I've said this several times on this show, but I do feel like folks working in hospitality, especially these days, have maybe the most important role, of all, which is to help people disconnect from the quote unquote matrix, to help people remember that they're social beings, right? And there's something
Mm-hmm.
beautiful about humanity, and quite frankly, like it's just getting rarer and rarer to have these sort of like intimate experiences. And I think the innovators in hospitality have this. I would go so far as to call it a calling to really craft these spaces that enable conversation to happen, that enable like reconciliation to happen, that enable love to happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like it's always been important, but it's all the more important in the world that we live in today. So it sounds like you recognized that from a young age, that there was something magical and something special about the space.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, so many beautiful life moments are lived in hospitality spaces, whether that's the anticipation of a first date, and could that be, true love if that's what you're looking for, breakups and everything in between, and family celebrations and holidays and just travel in general and having these really memorable experiences. There's so much life that's lived within a hospitality space, and it is extremely rewarding for a lot of us in the industry to create these beautiful spaces that allow these moments to happen very organically,
Mm.
to enhance those moments and really give people the opportunity to take away a really strong memory from them.
I wanted to get your thoughts on hospitality school, because most of the folks that have come on this show have not been to any sort of hospitality school. And I think like there's something about the industry in its own right that kind of prides itself on being like, hey, it's very entrepreneurial, right? It's, you hear stories
Mm-hmm.
all the time of people that started washing dishes at a restaurant, right? And then they sort of just moved their way up. Or you hear folks. I recently had someone on the podcast that started as a pool deck boy, right? And now he owns and operates several leading luxury hotels in the world. And it's really cool. You hear these like stories of grit, right? These stories of just kind of growing up and figuring shit out as you went, right? And I haven't spoken to as many people who have gone,
Mm-hmm.
albeit a little bit more of a traditional route here. So I'd love your thoughts. Like, what aspects of training in school do you think have really helped you as an entrepreneur? And is there anything specific that you think, oh, like this in particular was very valuable, and would have just been really hard to get this through sort of
Mm-hmm.
like lived experience, if you will? Like, well, what are the pros of actually having some quote unquote formal training?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I went to Boston University, and their hospitality school at the time was number two in the country, behind Cornell. And Cornell didn't appeal to me because I didn't want to move to the middle of nowhere, and I was just very ready for a city environment, leaving Orange County and having been within the same 5 square miles for 18 years. But I think that program was very unique compared to some of the more traditional hospitality schools.
Mm.
You think of some of the Swiss hotel schools that are very by the book, very traditional, very focused on here's how everything has been done in this industry. And I actually think that's held the industry back in a lot of ways. I find hospitality in general to be stuck a little bit in the past until recently in a number of different areas. But Boston University's school was really unique in that half of your programming was really in real world experience. And so you were using the school as a vehicle to set you up with these really amazing, like actual paid jobs that I had within a really beautiful event space, a luxury event world, and then also a fine dining restaurant group. So I actually would say that the benefit of my hospitality school kind of background was that I was in a city and with a program that forced me to have real world experience and just facilitated me getting these jobs with companies that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to get a job at if I was just some 18-year-old kid. But they, really helped me get into these groups. And so I think that's where hospitality school is beneficial for me, is the actual job experience that was outside of the classroom. That being said, I think having some of I treat it this way. It's a business degree with a hospitality focus. So by the time I was looking for jobs with hotel and restaurant groups after graduation, it was easy for me to kind of understand the lingo, understand a hotel P&L, understand, the nuance of hospitality within regular business areas of marketing and accounting and sales. So,
wow. It's so interesting too that like you went to school and the biggest benefit of the school was the lived experience. It's kind of funny how that works itself out. But right to your point, and I think about this all the time, it's like there's just something so different about living in a city and what you can get exposed to in terms of just opportunity. I mean, obviously this has been said by people much smarter and zillions of times, but the point being, right, just having that exposure and having the ability to hop into these different contexts so easily, and quite frankly, these again are real world contexts and not the lab, so to speak, right? So very, very cool opportunity that you had there. As I've observed your work, Cory, I feel like you have this this ability to strike this cool balance between the past and the future, like history and maybe some more contemporary sort of inspiration of luxury. And one of the things I've been thinking a little bit more about, and actually I was talking to my wife about this a couple nights ago, was this idea that like one of the things I miss about quote unquote like old school luxury, if you will, was this experience where you'd go and people would treat you. They basically treat you like royalty, right? Which I think like the best hospitality practitioners would tell you, like, hey, hospitality is about creating these magical moments that in some ways don't even feel like aren't actually real, but they make you feel good, right? And there's some sort of like magic there. But I think a lot of that magic actually comes from some of the standards and some of the ways that like, oh, every time I'm called sir, right? And no one has ever called me sir outside of like a nice hotel, right? And like there are these like funny moments where it on the one hand it kind of feels a little stuffy, it kind of feels a little dated. On the other hand, it kind of feels nice because it's like in no other context in today's world is that a reality, right? Like, and so and I see some of that as I look at the Madrona, look at some of your other your projects. Like you seem to sort of have this eye for like striking the balance between the story that the place has told and the tradition it rightly holds, and then also sort of inviting a more contemporary sort of flair, if you will, to it. How do you think about these projects? How do you think about sort of the balance between the old and the traditional and the new and the next? How does Cory sort of wrap his mind around all of this?
I think as I think about hospitality and you think of old world hospitality, the sir, the ma'am, the ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, to take a Ritz-Carlton page from their playbook. I think it really comes down to a lot of core things that through any segment of the market, whether that's an upscale hotel, ultra luxury, or just a really cool boutique hotel like the Madrona, there's ways to have this through line that resonates with all humans of guest recognition. Like I work at the hotel, I know who you are.
Yeah.
How I address you, how I interact with you, maybe the style of that changes based on the level of luxury. But there's still this: I want to be recognized as a guest. I also want my needs to be anticipated. I mean, these are just core hospitality things. And I think as you kind of go up the chain in the segment to more luxury spaces, it's really just how much time is someone, an employee, spending on these things to anticipate someone's needs. Like, how above and beyond can you go? But there's still that core thing, which is I want to walk into a hotel as a guest. I want them to know who I am to some degree, and I want them to understand why I'm there and how they can help make my stay easier, better, more efficient, more exciting in really, really little ways. And so I think the kind of mixture of the past and the traditional and the modern is a lot more about the style of how you deliver that service, the creativity of how you deliver that service, but the core of it is still the same. And I really think about that a lot with my own property of how can I deliver this really luxury service experience without it feeling stuffy. And a lot of that just comes down to the style that you empower your team members to deliver upon.
It wasn't that anything was wrong. No, not really. It was just, I don't know, life. The kids were young, so full of life and life, but always needing more. Their careers were oh so demanding, and it always felt like saying no was just never an option. And somewhere in between it all, they had misplaced each other. The bickering had become more frequent, the patience thinner, vulnerability a rare guest, romance something that they promised that they'd get back to eventually, but eventually never came. Until here. At first, it was just a drink at the lobby bar. It's designed so effortlessly intimate, it made conversation feel natural again. Then a slow walk through the garden, up to their handcrafted safari tent, where a cellist played a song that neither of them recognized, but somehow felt like home. And then, without thinking, their hands found each other. Without effort, without expectation. And suddenly, they were laughing, like they had on the second date at the coffee shop downtown that no longer existed. They were complaining about each other's mothers like they had on the cobblestone street in Rome under St. Peter's shadow. It wasn't an escape from reality. It was, in fact, their truest reality. It was them. At Journey, we're building a collection of stays that inspire reconnection. Do you know a hotel, a treehouse, a ski chalet, or other soulful property that has inspired you to reconnect? If so, share it with me at zach@journey.com. What's really interesting is, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, when you walk into different spaces, you sort of you want to be different things, or like you kind of like rise to the occasion, or you like take off your jacket and get a little cozy and comfortable, like. And I find that even the way I talk, right, depending on kind of like where I'm at, and it's not that it doesn't feel showy, or not necessarily I'm trying to like I'm putting on it. I'm not. There's no like facade necessarily. It's more just like different places inspire different Zachs to come out, right? And they're all a part of Zach, right? But maybe different aspects of me are just highlighted depending on the space I'm in. And what I have found is again in my experience here, the single biggest factor on how what kind of Zach kind of comes out in that moment, or the Zach that I find myself being in a moment, tends to be my relation with the staff. Like more than the design, more than the ambiance. I mean, those are all huge like influencers as well. But if I'm spoken to in a very like respectful, sir, can I have I use complete sentences, right? I use cannots instead of can'ts. Like it's just funny how much you can be influenced as a guest based off of how someone is speaking to you. And really what I think that's rooted in is like, oh no. it's like when you go to your friend's house, right? And I'm from Hawaii, and we grew up, and everyone, you take your shoes off before you go into someone's home. And I now live in DC, and the first time when I moved here and I did that, my friends thought I was crazy, right? It was just weird. But like culturally, it makes a lot of sense in one place and another. And so it's like these hotels, many of like the projects you've created and collaborated on, they command a certain culture that I think people are enabled to sort of like rise up to meet. And I think that's actually one of the
Mm-hmm.
most under talked about, but like most fun aspects of placemaking is that you can actually
Mm-hmm.
call out a version of someone's self in that place in a really beautiful and dynamic way. And maybe it's a version of themselves that they wish they could interact with more, or wish they saw in the
Mm-hmm.
mirror more. And it's cool that you can do all of that through obviously great design and great ambiance and beauty, but really also just through staff and how your people hold up the culture that you want them to present.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a 100% a cultural opportunity. And when it comes to hiring, training, but even beyond that, just how I treat my team members at the Madrona uh, is a direct reflection of how I want them to also treat guests.
Mm.
And, this is nothing new. I think, hotel groups and individual properties that have high retention, that have great service, really treat their employees well. Because I do truly believe that the employee experience is as important as the guest experience. And when you're talking about, different versions of yourself in different spaces, I'm prone to that as well. I know if I'm going to, luxury property, like I think about the Montage in my hometown, which was like the first like really big luxury resort in Laguna Beach. And going there, there's something really beautiful in knowing that the staff isn't going to say no to anything
Mm.
because that's the expectation of service. And in my mind, I really correlate that with luxury. That this team member, whether it's valet or front desk or housekeeping or the bartender, is going to go out of their way to say yes to me. And I actually don't think that always has to be in just a luxury 5-star space. I think that that can be across the board. And it's really back to the culture of the employees and team members and how you treat them and the expectation of service that you give them. At the Madrona is a luxury property. It just is, but it's also extremely relaxed.
Mm.
That being said, you're going to walk in, you're going to feel very comfortable because the staff is relaxed in the style of service that they give you. But if you ask for something, they will make it happen,
Yeah.
up to a certain point, of course. But, unless they hit true limitations on what they can do, they are going to go above and beyond, out of their way, get creative to think about how to do that. And in my mind, that's true luxury. Whereas a guest at the Madrona, I just know that that person at the front desk that checked me in has my back. And if I need to shoot them a text, we use a texting service for all of our guests, which is wildly helpful and really enables everyone to feel like they can ask for anything at any time. Shooting a text and saying, "Hey, I'm walking around up in the garden. Can someone bring me 2 Negronis?" And someone's sitting in the garden, 2 Negronis come up on a tray from a bartender. Like that, in my mind, that's luxury.
Yeah.
And that didn't take a bunch of extra cost. It didn't take a bunch of extra time. It didn't take third party, service training to come in from the outside to really teach them how to do it. It's just about saying yes and empowering team members to do so. And in all of my projects at all levels and all segments, I really think a lot about how do I make these team members feel so well taken care of that they're excited to take care of the guest in the same way.
Yeah. Oh, dude, that's so beautiful. And I think that's like that is the differentiator at the end of the day. Like you can buy the best tech in the world, you can have the best design in the world. You could arguably have the best architecture in the world, the best location in the world. But if at the end of the day you don't also have the best people in the world, right, to service that space, everything does just fall short. Like I can think of a property that I won't name right now, but I was super excited to stay there and it was amazing. And like the property itself was stunning and beautiful. I had fallen in love with it on Instagram, but like the service just like fell so short. And I never really thought,
Mm-hmm.
because like it's very trendy And I have a lot of friends who are building really cool brands in the short-term rental space, the micro resort space, the sort of like blending of the lines between boutique hotels and short-term rental spaces. And there's this whole like movement of like, you know, low touch slash no touch hospitality, right? Like, how do you deliver an exceptionally beautiful, curated luxury experience without staff, which is a very, very, very obviously hard thing to do. Now there's, interesting business cases for like how you might pull something like this off. And again, this doesn't work in like a traditional hotel concept, obviously, but it's so interesting how, like I've been to one of these projects and one of these experiences that met all those boxes, like very beautiful, very curated, like really truly one of a kind experience. But there's just still something missing when like you can't,
Mm-hmm.
that there isn't a staff member where you really you're missing a core tenet of the personality of the place, and that core tenet is people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, not that one is bad and one is good, or both. There's a zillion different ways to kind of build a hospitality business, but to your point, I think that's actually ends up being the secret sauce at the end of the day. Everything else is like table stakes now, but like the
Mm-hmm.
secret sauce, like that core differentiator, I think is really how the people that represent the brand that you fall in love with are actually making you feel in a moment. And
Mm-hmm.
that's so hard to like just train someone to do well. And so those of you who've been able to do this well for your teams are just remarkable. Like, you guys are so inspiring to me, because that's so hard to do. It's so hard to get people to really care about delivering the kind of service and the vision that you have for a place, when you basically have to get them to really buy into it as if it's their hotel, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
has to be, I guess, like the core objective. Has that been super hard for you? Has it been easier to get people to buy in? The Madrona is obviously,
Yeah.
a very special place, from, I haven't been yet, but from everything I've seen about it, right? And so maybe it was a little easier because of how special of a place it was, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Talk to us about staffing.
I think it's a couple factors. I think, and this is throughout my entire career, I've had the privilege of working with really amazing hospitality groups that, my first hotel group was Viceroy Hotel Group back in the day when Brad Corzin was still running the show and founded that and was growing his own brand. And he was wildly influential for my early days and influencing me in how I think about the guest experience. And he was really amazing and still is now with Proper and his team there of creating a vibe
Hmm.
before vibe was really a thing that was kind of branded and expected in now the Instagram and TikTok aesthetic age. But beyond that, it was the vibe plus it was the experience and this attention to detail. And so it kind of, in my mind, it starts there. But what I really loved about my experience at Viceroy was, yes, there's a lot that comes from the product, right? I think about one of the first Viceroys in Santa Monica. It had a vibe, it had a cool guest base. Guests felt cool being there. And so employees felt cool working there.
Hmm.
And there's something to be said for having that foundation for an employee to feel good about where they're working.
Hmm.
And when an employee feels good about where they're working, it's just so much easier for them to give great service. And so, fast forward to the Madrona, it's a beautiful place and it's stunning grounds. And, even as a room attendant, you're walking between buildings through these beautiful landscaped acres and it feels good. And talking to my team, they're really proud to work there. And I think that's the baseline. Like, build a concept where an employee is proud to work there. And then I think beyond that, it is empowering them to deliver on service and letting them get creative. I think where a lot of brands can fail is that they either try to make that too rigid or too traditional, and they don't allow the team members to get creative, to kind of have their own voice, have their own style a little bit, and that's not always the right fit for every brand. But in the brands that I worked on, that's one of the things that I love most is that you really leaned into a bunch of really excited employees taking care of really excited guests. and it just becomes a lot more natural and a lot more seamless.
Dude, that's the dream, man. That's remarkable and not an easy thing to do, but sounds like you guys have been able to get at that, and that's wildly obviously important for the team, but even more important for your guests and sort of the
Mm-hmm.
overall experience that they'll have. You mentioned something a few minutes ago, Cory, about how hospitality, from your perspective, has, I don't think you said the word boring necessarily. Maybe you said like stale or something like that. But I interpreted it as you saying something along the lines of things hadn't changed too much until recently, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit. So, what is it about it now that has kind of sparked more interest, more creativity, more inspiration? And was this inspiration garnered before the launch of the Madrona? Talk to us a little bit about what you're most excited about now and why.
I think the definition of luxury is ever evolving, right? And this has been talked about by many people over the last number of years of, you know, time being a true luxury. And so if I can save a guest time in their stay and they're not having to deal with these 10 steps to get something done or transfer between these three departments to get something done, that is a luxury where you just make it easy for them to just be and exist and have their time on property be focused on having a good time, not trying to deal with logistics. And so I think that definition of luxury, especially in today's modern world with modern anxieties and all of the social media aspects that come with that, it's we're bombarded with a lot right now. We're bombarded with news updates. We're bombarded with a million text messages and emails. And how can I make, as a hotel person, as a restaurant person, how can I make it easy for a guest to get some escape from that, to really just live life in its simplest terms? And I think that's what I think is changing over time. And really, in this current moment, I actually think humans are quite simple,
Mm.
right? At our core, we want food, shelter, water, companionship. It's all just very, very easy to live a very happy life, when you have those things. And when you go into a hospitality space, it's about the bonuses on top of that: amazing food, amazing service, and the connection human to human. And I think it's just bringing it back to its core. And I think what hospitality has an opportunity to do right now is make the back end so easy and so efficient that you go back to people just helping people.
Mm.
And it's just service 101, and it's what service was meant to be. Is I'm a guest in a hotel and I'm paying whatever rate I'm paying, and I just don't need to question whether this person at the front desk can take care of me or not. And
Yeah.
it's still a cultural thing, but I think that's what we all, as travelers, and patrons of restaurants, really want, is this frictionless experience. And I think a lot about tech in the hospitality world, and some tech works and some tech doesn't. I think that any hospitality tech that's enabling an employee at the front desk to spend more time delivering on service, is good, right? It's that human connection that we're all craving. That's just the core of it.
And I mean, you know better than me, but I imagine that that's what the vast majority of people that are choosing to work in hospitality want to do, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
they signed up because they like people, they like meeting folks from all over the world. They like representing the beautiful spaces that they've helped cultivate and influence in some way. And then they're inundated with like having to do all these technical solves and or logging of things in CRMs or making sure that the PMS is working functionally, and they end up doing a bunch of things that again distract them from the very thing that they love, and quite frankly the thing that's going to most influence whether that guest has a good experience or not, which is how
Mm-hmm.
they interact with them. So it is so funny how there's so much tech in this space, and one of the things we think about a lot too is, to your point, like how do you create technology so that people can actually spend more time doing the very things that they want to do, and on the guest side too, right? How does how does whatever tech, if any, you offer to your guests, how does that enhance their experience and and make it a more frictionless experience, so they don't
Mm-hmm.
have to go through like their email and try to find their reservation number and all that. Like, how do you build something so that the guests themselves get to spend more time
Mm-hmm.
enjoying the space that you love, if you offer any sort of tech? And so I feel like there's a lot of
Yeah.
room to grow there in the industry.
Yeah, it's on both sides. Obviously, we were just talking about the employee side, and I always laugh because back in the day and even today, you see you're doing a photo shoot for a new hotel, and there's always this shot of the woman behind the front desk who's looking down on her computer typing something, and like that's the front desk shot with the employee. And I always think like, what is she typing? Like, how much computer work does this person have who's supposed to be there delivering on service? And yes, of course, she might be responding to a guest. There's all these other things, but it's a lot of like back office tasks. And so when you translate that over to the guest side, I want it to feel frictionless, but I also want it to feel human.
Mm,
I'm not a huge fan of QR code ordering platforms. So, I think this is a perfect example. I'm sitting out by a pool at a resort, and they give me a QR code card, and I can scan that and I can order room service, drop down menu, yada, yada, yada. And it feels like I'm ordering from DoorDash.
yeah.
I think some people do want that.
Yeah.
Where for me personally, and it's so personal, person to person, right? And so I think it's the tech meeting a guest also where they're at. But for me, luxury is I can just see a really beautifully designed menu and I can just text
Yeah.
someone and just say, "Hey, I want 2 Caesar salads, 3 martinis, some chips and guac, and a couple margaritas and some sparkling water." Sending that text and even just saying that took 2 seconds. Adding all of that to my cart and then clicking checkout and adding it to my room bill and all of that feels like more friction to me.
Mm,
And also that text conversation brings back the human element to it, that I know I'm talking to someone who's able to see that, ask follow-up questions, and it's a conversation. And so that's kind of the example for me of where tech can really shine, is that, that's all still tracked. That's all still going through a really cool software system. But it's meeting the guest where they're at and just making it really conversational for them to get what they need, rather than a bunch of clicks on the
yeah.
screen.
Oh, dude, I love that, and thank you for calling out the QR codes, man. I I just hate, like, literally the minute you sit down and I find that I haven't found this as often as at hotels, as just sort of like other restaurants I go to. But I've had several friends who are like, "Oh, you got to go to this restaurant. It's like a really good restaurant." And I sit down and there's a QR code, and immediately I'm like, "This is not a good restaurant." Like, it's like
Yeah.
and maybe it is a great restaurant, and there've been some
Mm-hmm.
times where it was great, right? But like the experience when you see that, right, immediately communicates like, we don't have enough people for you. Like, that's how I
Yeah.
interpret it. It's like you're not worthy
That's
enough
interesting.
to, like, have our attention, is how I feel. Because again, when you're going out to eat, like, unless you're going to a place where it's impossible to get like a drink order, or like whatever, if you're at a
Mm-hmm.
bar, or like a busy book club or whatever, like there are certain use cases. And I think the pool example is a good one, but I like your idea even better, which is just, hey, I can imagine a little sign, right? A beautifully elegant sign that's designed right next to the pool table that basically says, like, "Hey, we'll be around every couple minutes, but if
Mm-hmm.
you can't wait, here's our phone number." That feels magical. It
Yeah.
gives me the permission, if I don't see you or if I don't want to talk to you for whatever reason, to get my order in another way. But it to your point, feels so much more magical than the QR codes. I hate the QR codes with
Mm-hmm.
ordering. And again, like, I love QR codes for a lot of other things. Like when I'm in my
Mm-hmm.
hotel room, right? And it's like, okay, clearly, like, there's not a staff member here or whatever. I love the ability to quickly scan something and not have to go, like, find the URL or whatever. Love that use case.
Yeah, of course.
But when I'm in a lobby, or I'm in a restaurant, or it's just like, oh, dude,
Yeah.
I despise it. I despise it. And there's probably good data that says it works because people use it.
I think it's so many different. I mean, at the Madrona, there's QR codes for
Okay,
sure,
yeah,
but
yeah,
they're used in very specific ways
yeah,
that make it easy for a guest to interact with something.
yeah.
So we have these brass plaques that have QR codes throughout all of the public spaces that allow someone to scan and get a full visual guide of all of the art that's on the walls,
See, well, that
understand
makes
the
sense.
artist, the
Yeah, yeah,
story, and all the art at our property is for purchase through Dolby Chadwick Gallery in San Francisco, amazing partner of ours. And so that becomes a seamless thing, and it's just so easy rather than somebody having to go ask the front desk necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's finding those ways where technology becomes the easy thing rather than the hard thing.
Exactly.
And I think it just can never replace the human experience and the human interaction.
Well,
I'm just such a fan of going to a restaurant and having a server that is just got their own personality. They're on top of it. They're engaging. They're anticipating my needs. And they just know that I'm there to have a good time, and they're going to do whatever it takes to do that.
Yeah.
While still like making me laugh.
Yeah.
I was having brunch yesterday with a bunch of friends, and our server was perfect on top of everything when it came to, the logistical steps of restaurant service. But she overheard something we were saying in conversation. You could see her smirk a little bit. And then I commented to her, and she engaged with us in this really beautiful personal way. And by the end of this, 20-second interaction as she's clearing our table, we're all just in stitches laughing. And I walked away from that experience, and the food was fine. The space was fine, but I had a great time because of her.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just the core of what hospitality can be when it's done really, really well, is finding great people who enjoy what they're doing to have really human moments.
Yeah, 100%. And, I love that example as even the example that you gave about the QR codes with the art. To me, sort of like the question to ask is, does this enhance the physical experience or not? Like, does sort of the ability to scan this enhance? And in that context, of course, right? Because there's not going to be somebody who's just standing by every portrait in the hotel that can tell you about it, right? And so that's a perfect example of an experience enhancer. And I would just argue that, like, anytime you're checking out via or the worst is like when you don't even have a physical menu, and like you have to scan the QR code to even just see the menu, and then you have to go and check. Like, it's like, oh gosh. And again, I'm a tech optimist kind of guy. Like, I love tech. Like, but this is just or when the server brings a little like QR code or whatever the device is, not the QR code, but when they bring the device to like. And they're literally logging in your order as you're talking to them. And again, you don't find that at nice places, thank God. But like, I'm still surprised every once in a while I walk into a place that I think is going to be at a certain caliber, and I'm like, why is there this huge like cell phone from the 1980s in front of me? It's just oh gosh, man. Experienced detractor for sure. But dude, we could talk about my love of and hate of technology for forever. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is just how you choose your creative partners. Obviously, like, the design is stunning at the Madrona, and you mentioned you've got a partner with an art gallery. How were you just sort of like pretty well networked in sort of the creative space before this project? Because or how do you think about finding like the right creative partners for the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of my work, once I left the operations world and I started going into more marketing, branding, and concept development, a lot of it was trial and error. When I was in my late 20s and, I really thought I was something and was very, very cool and had, a great perspective. And I did to a point, but I didn't have a lot of experience as far as hiring creative partners for my projects. So there's a lot of trial and error in there. For me right now, I've had the privilege of being able to work with some amazing branding agencies, digital marketing folks, and over the years who I've developed trust with. And I go back to the same creative partners over and over and over again for a number of reasons. And that doesn't mean that every project I do, creative partners for my hotel and the restaurant group that I'm a consulting partner in here in San Francisco, Izzy's, I use different creative people for both, because sometimes this photographer is a fit for this style of concept, and sometimes they're fit for something else. Sometimes this graphic designer is great for these elements, but not great for these elements, even within the same concept. But I think what the core of it is that we work well together and we can understand each other. Because where I've seen this go awry is having creative partners, creative agencies are just funny in general. It's always really interesting to be privy to some of the conversations that happen when it comes to like font choices and color palettes, and it gets very heady. And just I've had conversations about the swoop in a certain letter that have lasted 90 minutes, and it's quite funny to me. And sometimes those conversations are necessary, but what I find to be the core of working well with some of these creative partners is that you're on the same page and you understand each other and how you communicate. And that's where it makes those interactions and those partnerships so much more seamless. So the people that I use now for all of my projects and the roster of folks that I can pull in one-on-one, a la carte, are all people who understand how I communicate and understand the vocabulary I use, what's important to me, but also can bring to the table their own creative ideas, are not just, working for me as the client, but really bringing something unique to the table and also challenging me. And I think it's still that trust and still that dialogue. I've worked with some creative partners. I'm thinking about a restaurant group where I was creative director and head of marketing. And I hired some creative partners that really just did what I asked them to do. And that wasn't actually right all the time. Sometimes I needed someone to push back on me and say like, well, let's think about it this way. And I think having that rapport is so important. So I feel very lucky right now to have a roster of a team that I just work well with, and they just get it.
That's amazing. Is there a big difference? And based off of what you were just saying, I assume the answer is yes, but in how you think about sort of restaurant design versus hotel design in general is obviously a little bit more complicated because you've got like common spaces and then you've got obviously rooms, but let's take like hotel lobby, right? And like a restaurant, like do you find yourself approaching the creative process quite differently, or are there a lot of parallels?
I think there's a lot of parallels in my role. Really my specialty is in concept development, and what that means for me is that I'm pulling together the team of people to make a concept happen. The Madrona was, and is my baby, where I was able to have a lot more control in what that looked like. But really for me, what it was is thinking about, on the design side, I'm not a designer myself, but I've got enough of an eye and enough of an understanding of what the concept should look and feel like that I can communicate with the interior design team in a way that is effective, and we can really collaborate on what a space is meant to be. But I think at the core, it's the same between hotels and restaurants. It is, how do you create a space that is visually stunning and inspiring, but it has to feel like it's got some depth and authenticity to it. Kind of going back to what you were saying about bridging the past and the present, I think as humans, we care greatly about authenticity in a space. And that authenticity, I don't necessarily mean authentic to a certain time period or to a certain location, but I think authenticity and commitment to a certain vision. And I think when my projects go really well, it's that I am able to look at all of the different people that are a part of it, design being a huge one, and say, we are all singing from the same hymn book when it comes to what this place is meant to be, how guests are meant to interact with it, how we want them to interact with it, while also still being flexible enough to say that a guest, I've envisioned spaces and I design them with a certain idea in my head with all these partners. And we say, okay, here's the space and here's how people are going to use it. And then you open the doors and on day one, guests are using it totally differently. And so you've got to have a lot of flexibility in there too, but it's when everyone can kind of be on the same page and really finding purpose for the space. Looking at hotels and restaurants that I've worked on from concept to day one, it's how do we want someone to feel comfortable in this space, and how do we want to enable their experience to be whatever they want it to be. If this is the Madrona, I'll use as a very specific example. We've got, these living room spaces that are really just an extension of the food and beverage outlet, restaurant and the bar, and it feels seamless. And so it's designing the space with that in mind of how do you create all these really fun moments for someone to have a cocktail.
Yeah.
And some people are going to want to have a cocktail sitting in like a standard table and over in the corner and read a book. And you're going to have a group of girls come in for wine country weekend who like want to kick off their heels and like get really comfortable in a couch environment and treat it like it's their own living room. And that is also a form of luxury where someone feels comfortable enough to do that. And I think it's giving the guests a lot of permission to use the space in ways that feel right for them.
Oh, dude, so well said. And I love that you guys have, intentionally rethought sort of like the traditional like lobby bar, if you will, and catered to these different expressions, right, of what someone might want to experience. Because I think a lot about just like, hey, what is sort of the next generation of hotels? Like, what will they look like? What should they look like? Who should they be? Who should they be for? And these are obviously like really huge questions where there are zillions of right answers. But I think what I always come back to is how can hotels do a better job at making the space feel like it can be just as special to Zach as it is to Cory. And Zach and Cory might find different things special about it, but it felt just as genuine to me, or just as inviting to me as it did to you, even if we like different things. And again, it's such a tall order, but it sounds like a lot of that thinking with respect to design and placemaking is very integral to the work that you do. Um, is there as you think about sort of like restaurants, particularly Cory, and your work there, is there like a trend that you think isn't talked about enough that should be talked about more or thought about more in sort of like restaurant concepting? And then I want to ask you the same thing on the hotel side, but let's start with restaurants.
I am not a trend guy. I will proudly admit that. I am not a fan of creating the space so it looks good on Instagram. I am not a fan of a wall that has like a catchy neon statement that you're hoping a lot of guests will take photos of and it becomes a part of your online presence. That's not who I am. And all the projects that I work on have so much of me personally in them. I'm a true purist that really thinks that what we're craving right now as consumers is the core of hospitality, which is a beautiful space that feels good. Doesn't For me, it doesn't have to photograph well, and which is funny because so much of my work is in marketing, and my marketing brain is like, no, it actually does need to photograph well, and food needs to look good. And yes, there's ways to do that with lighting and things like that, but I don't want to design a space where all of my energy is going into the aesthetic of it, and there's just not much time, energy, resources left to think about the service experience, to think about operational efficiency, to think about the actual product that you're serving. There was I believe it was a New York Times article that someone had sent me recently that was talking about trends in restaurants, and that, you've got good food and good service and good aesthetics, and you actually don't need to have all three of them. And it was like picking two out of the three. And I don't agree that that is, the aim that we should have right now. I think the restaurants that I love going to are typically legacy restaurants, institutions that have had consistency. And so in the F&B space, consistency is the most important thing for me. And there is actually a lesson to be learned from some really beautiful chain restaurant concepts where the consistency is why people come back. And top of mind comes Hillstone Restaurant Group. And I've been a Hillstone stan since I was in high school. Growing up in Orange County, there was 5 different Hillstone concepts within a stone's throw of each other. And I was just there last week, and the spinach and artichoke dip tastes the same as it did when I was 16 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
The restaurants feel the same as they did when I was 16 years old. Sure, I might be ordering different things, as my tastes change and things like that. But there's this kind of classic consistency. The service feels the same, that I think there's a comfort in that we're all craving. And at the same time, there's going to be other scenarios where as a guest, I want to have something totally new and something totally outside the box, but there's still the core of what it is, which is great food and great service in a space that makes you feel good. And you can define that however you want, whether you define that as vibe or it's just the interior design aesthetic element of it, add in the music, etc., yada yada. But I really think it's hitting on all of those marks where it just becomes the core of what hospitality is, rather than the trends. That being said, I will think about trends when it comes to menu planning. A lot of my work is working alongside chefs to say, like, it's your kitchen, it's your menu, you do what you want, but given this market and given the clientele that we're going after, here's a few ideas for menu items that will just sell well.
Yeah.
And some of those might be based on trends. Like as of right now, like chips and dips has been having a moment for a while.
Yeah.
And I think continues to do so and becomes just a top seller for a lot of menus. But how do you kind of, I guess, pander to that trend while still interpreting it in your own way? So I don't think about trends too often because I think they're so fleeting.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I just go back to the core of what hospitality is, which is just making people feel really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool to hear, and exciting, because I do think there's definitely conversation around there, out there around designing for Instagram specifically, right? And and thinking through like, hey, how do you ensure that you have all these picture worthy, these how do you sort of create staple moments that can be captured and can be associated back with your property. And but I'm right there with you, right? It's like, okay, well, what happens in 3 years when like no one cares about those faux grass neon signs anymore, and they're actually looked at as like very, very dated and weird, right? And
I mean, that's exactly it. Like there's certain restaurants you'll walk into that have a design element from a trend that was really popular on TikTok 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Visually, and it automatically, you're like, oh, this is like an old thing. This isn't this isn't the new. And like a Hillstone restaurant today looks the same as it did 25 years ago. Like the design standards are the same.
Yeah.
And there's something just so cool about that you're not pandering to trend and you're really just making people feel good. And then that becomes your aesthetic.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, dude, what about hotels before we wrap here? Anything, you're not a trend guy. We got that loud and clear, which I think is great. But with respect to sort of just observations about the industry, or as you think about future hotel concepts, the Madrona was obviously your kind of like baby. It's amazing. You've clearly done something very incredible there. But is there anything, as you think about sort of a next project that you're focused on, or maybe you see some white space in the industry where you think there's some opportunity to do something a little bit different?
I actually currently I'm exploring projects in the short-term rental space, which is quite funny because I never thought that would be something of interest to me. But I think there's a really clear opportunity on how you can kind of create a micro resort that has a business model and specifically a labor model that becomes extremely efficient. We all know that the hotel and restaurant industry, actually, we all don't. Many of our guests in both hotels and restaurants have no idea how hard it is behind the scenes to make any money.
Yeah.
There's a huge learning opportunity there. And so it is hard to run a restaurant. It is extremely difficult to make money doing that. I work a lot on small hotels. It is very hard to make money doing a small hotel. And so I've been thinking very creatively about how do I kind of mix this Airbnb multi-unit opportunity with some hospitality touch points that make it feel more like a hotel and kind of bridging the gap between the two, where I guess you could technically say it's limited service, but it really isn't, because there's so many creative ways to give a guest what they're looking for without having to be a full-blown staff, at the front desk 24/7. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that gray area between an Airbnb and a hotel specifically. And also for me, as I look at other projects, it's let the place decide what it's supposed to be. When we were building the Madrona, Jay Jeffers, my business partner and the interior designer, who should take a ton of credit for how amazing that place is, we didn't think, okay, we want to make a Madrona. Where do we put it? It was, we found this place and said, let that place tell the story. Let this very specific building, let this very specific piece of property tell the story and design around that. Let that be the canvas for you, so to speak, where you're not trying to force something into a place where it doesn't necessarily belong. It is, and I think that comes with a huge amount of authenticity, and going full circle, that's what guests are craving. This authentic, this feels like it's the right place at the right time with the right experience, and it all just connects together in this way that just feels good.
Yeah. Oh, dude, so well said. And I mean, I think you guys nailed it. And I can't wait to see. I know there are a lot of people that have been on guests on this show, and a lot of people listening to this that are also sort of flirting with the idea of what does a Airbnb concept that gives lots of nods to a hotel experience feel like. What is the future micro resort? And it's fun because it's like this. It's like a blank canvas in so many ways, and I think you have this really unique. You're in a very unique position, having built or having launched a hotel yourself, and then all the other things that you have your hands in to try to bring something like this to life. So that's wildly exciting. I'll be here along for the journey and can't wait to hear more about that project and your other projects. But Cory, if there's anywhere folks should go to connect with you, what's the best way for people to get in touch if they're interested in collaborating with you in a project and or just learning a little bit more about you and your story?
Sure. I have my own website. It's CorySchisler.com, which feels a little narcissistic, but it's just easy. And I've got a portfolio of some of my work on there and capabilities. And yeah, it's got the whole story.
Wonderful. Well, folks, I'll have that linked in the show notes below, as well as a link to Cory's LinkedIn. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Cory, thank you for your time, man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was blessed. Appreciate it.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us for this episode of Behind the Stays. I'd love to know what you thought of the episode. Feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram at Behind the Stays or send me an email at zach@journey.com. If this is your first time tuning in, it's a pleasure to have you and we hope to have you back again soon. But if you've been a listener for a while, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd subscribe to the show if you aren't already, and then leave us a rating and review of the show wherever you're streaming this podcast. Oh, and if you know a hotelier or a hospitality entrepreneur that's building something new and novel, I invite you to introduce them to me so that my team and I can discuss bringing them on the show. Again, you can just shoot me an email at zach@journey.com or a DM on Instagram. Behind the Scenes is brought to you by Journey, a next-generation loyalty program built for the modern traveler. We're looking to onboard new boutique hotels, unique stays, and the top vacation rental management companies onto our platform every day. If you're a hospitality entrepreneur who has a stay or a collection of stays with soul, we'd love for you to apply to join our alliance at journey.com/alliance. Again, that's journey.com/alliance. Thanks for being here, y'all. We will see you next time.